If you want to publish a book, but you feel stuck, out of time, and you don't know what to do next, then it's time to finish the damn book. Here's your host, Susie Schaefer.
Welcome to this episode of Finish the Damn Book. I'm your host, Susie Schaefer. My guest today is Charles Daly, known as Charlie, a ghostwriter and developmental editor working with memoir and nonfiction. He specializes in helping authors go there with difficult topics. He's the co-author of I Will Follow You Anywhere, the true story of the 9/11 responders who took on Congress by John Field and Charles Daly, forward by John Stewart, and Make Peace or Die, A Life of Service, Leadership, and Nightmares, which was featured on Jocko Podcast. His travel writing and long-form journalism has appeared in the Boston Globe, We Are the Mighty, Colcat, and Thought Catalog. That's a mouthful. He lives in a cottage on the Atlantic coast of Ireland with his wife, a Swiss crime novelist, their cat, and their baby boy. When he's not writing, he's exploring the coast in small boats or on call with his local lifeboat crew. Welcome, Charlie.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's so fascinating to read your bio. I read it once before and then I go back and look at it again and I'm like, wow, what a fascinating life. How did you, before we even get into the ghostwriting stuff, how did you end up in Ireland?
Yeah. Well, depending on how you look at it, I'm back in Ireland. My dad's from here originally, and that's a whole crazy story, which is in the first book that I wrote, is his story, the one that was on Jocko. But we had the long story short, we had a cottage that was in our family that was kind of ours if we wanted to get rid of the rat problem. And I had spent my summers here, and the kind of pace of life and proximity to really wild ocean was a lot more of what I was looking for. And my wife's a novelist, and that was like pretty much her dream, a dream she didn't think was ever going to come true, to live in a cottage by the sea and write novels. And that's what we're doing now. And and it's funny because when we moved here, I was doing a lot more kind of copywriting and stuff, and books were on the side. And I can remember when I was talking to tech companies in Boston or San Francisco saying that I live in Ireland, there was always this Whereas when you tell somebody you're going to ghostwrite their book from a cottage in Ireland, it's like, where else would you want your book written, really,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole idea of it is so Hallmark movie.
Right. They filmed one of those over the hill from us in a very adorable village.
Oh, I love that. And I have not been to Ireland, and actually I am part Irish, is part of my heritage. And so it is something that I definitely want to do. So who knows, maybe I will be coming to visit you in your small cottage on the shore.
Yeah. Ireland. And I mean, if you're here in the winter, this time of year, it's good reading weather. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Especially in the wintertime when it's cold and kind of gloomy and all that, it sets the tone for, your wife being a novelist and you being a ghostwriter. I'm like, how picture perfect is that?
Yeah, it's not bad. It works for us anyway.
Well, good. I'm glad, because you're obviously putting out really high quality work and doing a lot. So let's talk a little bit about your work as a ghostwriter. Are there things that in your line of work that are specifically challenging?
Oh man. I mean, for me, you mean for me personally?
I think for you personally, but also if you want to talk about in general for ghostwriters.
Sure. I mean, I think, the constant struggle, especially these days, is, money, inflation, stagflation, whatever you want to call it. And that side of things, I mean, I don't think that ever goes away. And you hope to just have better problems as your career progresses. I think I'm a cautionary tale on taking on really big, important projects. Those aren't always the same as high paying projects. And, I like the balance I have there, but, and I think it's even harder for someone who does pure journalistic nonfiction. But yeah, for me personally, the big one is sitting still and actually like the physical act of writing. I mean, you read that bio. I spend a lot of time on the water and outdoors, and it like that part's really hard. And I think for some people it isn't, and the part they struggle with is the internal stuff, or I don't think writing is easy for anybody, but one of the things I love about ghostwriting is that it is collaborative, and that you can find projects that involve being out in the world. And oftentimes I'm working with people who aren't really desk job type people either. I think that's where that, besides like family history, that's one of the things that's drawn me to work with veterans a lot.
Yeah.
It's this really good combination of folks who tend to be punctual and like good to work with, but also like have a certain kinetic, energetic quality that you don't always find in other fields.
Yeah, I agree with that. A big portion of the basis or the foundation of my business was to work with veterans. And so I actually am the publisher for the Veterans Writing Group in San Diego.
Oh, cool.
I've worked on multiple veteran books, and I agree with you. I really love working with them. Their stories are so compelling. And for me to be able to give back in that way to help them share their stories is empowering. And I think that if there weren't people like you and I that do help veterans get their stories out there, those veteran stories are going to be gone when they're gone. And I think that's a really critical part to what we're doing here in the world.
Yeah, I mean, and that one hits close to home. My dad is a Korean War veteran who had me late in life. He's 98, I'm 36. And it's really funny in school when we would talk about, like, I mean, you don't learn much about the Korean War in school, but when we were in like history class, I'd mentioned that my dad was in the Korean War, and I'd have teachers be like, I think you mean Vietnam. And I was like, no, Korea. And my grandfather was in World War I.
Wow.
But no, it's, if you're a student of history at all, it's a sad thing to see, war on terror vets are the age that Vietnam vets were when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Vietnam vets are the age that World War II vets were when I was a kid. And you're right. I mean, those stories, deserve to be told and account for part of the record of history. And there's some really interesting ways that's been done all over the world too. I was recently reading a woman, Svetlana Alexievich, who was a war reporter in the Soviet-Afghan War on the Soviet side. And she did an oral history of veterans in that war. And she wrote the book about Chernobyl that became that series a few years ago.
Right.
But it's really interesting to get that perspective and to have it in book form where it's like hundreds of people's stories.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Do you work primarily on fiction or nonfiction? I know that you do both, but is one kind of like, do you do more of one versus another?
I don't write fiction. I just write nonfiction, and I kind of split my time between like memoir and some business books and things.
Very good. So what is your process like? Like when you sit down, say an author is coming to you and they want you to write their story, how do you embark on that journey with the author?
Yeah. So one thing like that has come up again and again with when I talk to other ghosts, and I don't know how it is for you, but I found that like it always starts with this like vibe check. I have never been hired on the basis of like work I've done before or, education or credentials or anything like impressive or external. It's always been just, we get along. And, that from there, I think people would be surprised to know how long outlining can take, or in my opinion, should take. That it's really like, if you add it up, it's probably like 3 or 4 full days of like, I tend to spend anywhere from 10 to 40 hours of conversation on an outline, which I know there are people who do that, who will do a book over that amount of interviewing. But sometimes it really takes just going through everything you have to say like over and over again until we can see really what the shape of it wants to be.
Right.
And then from there, we would that informs the kind of questions that I ask. And sometimes, some of the books I've done have involved really hardcore, hard to talk about stuff. And one of the ways I approach that, and apparently my godmother works in the VA in Rhode Island with veterans from Vietnam and now mostly GWAT. But she said this is oddly similar to something called, I think it's extinction therapy, where if you talk about something enough, it just becomes a story instead of being something that can like grab you. And I've found that to work with authors, where we just go with how comfortable a topic is on a given day, and then we can always just come back to it as many times as we need to.
Yeah, I sometimes feel, and I've said this many times, that I am not a therapist, but there are many times that I have conversations that are very therapeutic. I'm also a psychic channel. And so there's a lot of spiritual stuff that happens when I work with clients. And, you do the same thing, because sometimes you have to go over that story that's really challenging multiple times to get the real details and get the emotion around it. And so, honestly, you should receive an honorary therapy degree.
It's really funny.
I know how hard it is.
Because I know some people, because I've joked that it's like unlicensed therapy, some of what we do. And I know some people take that, like they don't laugh, they don't joke about that. They're like, oh no, like this isn't you. And to some extent, that's right. I mean, there are some situations where maybe you should consider, therapy or something before you write a book. But on the other hand, I mean, there's all sorts of ways that people process their stuff, like unofficially, and it's part therapy, part conversation we could have on a bar stool, kind of, and everything in between.
Well, bartenders and hairdressers, they also are considered unprofessional therapists as well. So I guess
there it is.
We probably fall into that category. And honestly, that is one of the things that I love about the work that we do, is because we know that these stories are challenging for people, but the difference that you see in somebody in working with them 6 months, a year, the difference that you see in them after they've finished that book and the healing that they have done, whether they realize it or not, it is immeasurable. And it never ceases to blow my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I'll get pretty emotional if we talk about that point, because it's been amazing to be there for that, to help facilitate that in whatever way. And there's also that sense of accomplishment. I mean, what you're left with then is you actually have like a book, and, something your great grandkids will read, hopefully.
Right. The legacy books, I think, are a very important part of our future culture, because as I said before, when the veterans are gone or people are gone out of our lives, whether it's even just family members, those stories go with them. So it is important for us to preserve that for future generations. And I mean, obviously, probably the book that you wrote about your dad's life was probably one of your favorites, but do you have others that just really had an impact on you?
Yeah. I mean, I try not to get involved in projects that aren't special in some way. The one that I just turned in, where I'm a co-author and my name's on the cover so I can talk about it and everything, with John's book about the 9/11 responders and the various illnesses they got and the fight that they had to. I really liked that because it was a lot like the kind of books that made me want to be a writer. And I was getting to do journalism. It was really challenging. It was really interesting to take a really wide range to try to capture a community in a book, because there were a lot of people whose voices ended up in the book, not just like John it's his book, but then each chapter opens with like an oral history. That was really interesting. I've never interviewed two people at the same time who can't be in the same room with each other. And it's a long story, but that was one of the interviews I did. And I really liked that. I mean, I don't know. Again, I'll get emotional because now that's over and I've turned it in, and it's coming out next year, or if this is up in a few weeks, 2026, it'll be out in September for the 25th anniversary. And that's an important topic. that's something that's going to, hopefully that book is going to be a part of the historic record. Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever top that.
Yeah.
But the other thing I like working on proposals. I like the kind of sharing that early, and I have two in the works right now, but I can't talk about those.
Of course.
But I like that sort of hopefulness, and
Yeah.
just at the same time, it's always awkward because you deal with rejection in the process of getting out there. But yeah, those, and then I've had some really random ones that I recently edited a book, and I can't really say what it was about, but it was just something I never in a million years thought I would work on. It's something I'm interested in, but it's just not, like, it's kind of a great argument for maybe don't niche down too much. And that was really fun. And I like sometimes having a fun book right after a heavy one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that when you look at the whole client base that you're working on, I obviously may work with 20 or more authors at one time because they're all in a different place in the process, in the phase, right? So, but yeah, there's some that are very serious, and then there's some that are more lighthearted. And I think that having that balance is actually really good. It's healthy for us too, doing the work. So let me ask you this. What is your process like? Or I'm sorry, not your process, but how do you set expectations for clients? And what are some of the myths around what a ghostwriter actually does?
Yeah. Oh man, we could be here a while. I mean, there's so many. It's really funny. This is the first job I've ever had, except maybe surf instructor, where people had tons of questions when they asked what I do. And as opposed to just sort of like, oh, that's nice. And I think, people. So, I mean, one of the biggest misconceptions about ghostwriting is that it is something you fall back on if you can't write your own book. And I think that conversation at the level of like celebrity books gets very sexist and very classist very quickly. People know that like athletes work with ghostwriters and pop stars, but then they're like shocked that people with, political leaders do too. And although if you worked on the book I just finished about this battle in Congress, you wouldn't be surprised that some Congress people aren't smart enough to string words together. But I guess people assume it's like some kind of a cop-out or something, when in reality, a lot of people, I mean, I've worked with someone who went to the Columbia School of Journalism. I'll never be the writer that person is, but like they didn't have the time or the interest or the skill to write a book. And a book is a different type of writing. A ghostwriter helps you finish on time. And so anyway, there's that misconception, because everybody likes to know, like, oh, did so-and-so write their own book? And the answer I always give people is like, unless someone's like job that they disclose to the IRS, like their job description is writer or journalist, then yes, they worked with a ghostwriter.
Exactly. And you're right. There's no shame in it, because here's the thing. One of the biggest things, especially for nonfiction books, is that it does take an immense amount of time. Most people that do write books are entrepreneurs. They're running a business or two or three or whatever they're doing. So there's that time element, but also a ghostwriter is really going to make your words sound so much better, because we can't always articulate what's our experience, whereas a ghostwriter is going to pluck those really amazing words out of the sky and put them into a sentence that sounds much more eloquent than what if I just blurted it out. The other thing too is that when you're working with a ghostwriter, you're actually not as close to the material sometimes, and especially when we're talking about issues that are emotionally challenging or there's trauma involved in those stories, particularly with veterans who have PTSD or whatever their situation may be. They're very close to that story. And sometimes what happens is our psyche will block things from us and won't even allow us to share those, because we start the self-doubt. So that's where it's really great if working with a ghostwriter, because the ghostwriter can pull that out of you, and then you can leave it after that interview and walk away and be like, okay, I said it, it's done. And then you can find the right words to put that into the book in a written format that is going to help people connect to their story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a few, and this might be of interest to your listeners. I think there are some technical and tactical aspects of what you're describing that we bring to the table. So one thing, I really like the word collaboration, because a lot of times, so like the Columbia journalism guy is a perfect example. A lot of what I did was like developmental editing, and the raw material. It was the one time where it was like, actually, I should defer to what this person wrote because it is good. It's just not structurally sound. So there's that. But I think the other thing is, and this comes up with veterans, it also comes up with like founders and people who have really niche business skills. It can help to talk to someone who doesn't know what you know. And, as a civilian, like, I can be curious, but not like, you're gonna have to tell me what that acronym means. And by the way, the reader doesn't know either. So like, that would be something you might just gloss over. And I think that's a real advantage. And then when it comes to like a nonfiction book project, like with John's, it's not just the raw experience is the author's, and that has come from our interviews and our conversations. But then weaving that into context, and even there's this term we used in John's book for everybody's favorite thing, and it's so like, people who were there on 9/11 are so sick of everybody talking about how blue the sky was that day. And as one of the survivors I talked to put it, is like, as if bad things don't happen on sunny days. But sure enough, that's everybody's first observation. What's really cool, if you look at satellite images and images from the space station on that day, from Key West to Quebec, you can see the entire eastern seaboard, because there was one huge Arctic high pressure system that day, basically making what meteorologists called severe clear. And I thought that was like verging on poetic, that term.
Yeah.
And so part of how we set the scene for that morning right before the attack is this observation that one person made about the weather, this biting comment that like, as if bad things don't happen on sunny days. And then this other piece from my research, which is this just perfect description of what it looked like that day from the National Aeronautic, NOAA, the Weather Service in the US. Yeah. And that's collaboration. That's the way I see it. It's something where that would have been expressed differently if someone other than me had been involved in writing that scene. Right. Even though it's not my experience, it's not even most of the words aren't even mine, but it's the bringing it together. So,
well, and that's something too and when I'm working with an author, this is one of the things I teach. We were taught in school to start with an outline, and I know that is the structurally correct way to do things, but that's not the way that we think as humans. Mm-hmm. And so when I work with authors, I teach them what I call the sticky note method, to where we put them on sticky notes, we move them around, you write on one, yep, you have it right there in the background. You write on one particular story, and then you set that to the side and come back to it. Because the problem with the way that we want to write is, and the way we were taught in school, is linearly. So you start from point A and you get to point Z, right? That does not always make a compelling story. What makes a compelling story, and I use this example frequently, is Saving Private Ryan. The initial scene of that movie, you either get up and walk out of the theater, or you sit there and you don't move for 2.5 hours because you are so compelled to find out, how did they get there? So that part of storytelling and writing is critical to making your book successful. And a ghostwriter's job, or an editor's job, really, either or, depending on the book, is really to paint the picture and show versus tell. We hear that all the time in this industry. And most writers, especially novice writers, don't have that skill at the level that they're at. And so this is why it's imperative that you do use a ghostwriter or a strong editor to make sure that you are doing that you're painting the picture for the reader, so that they're not reading what happened first, second, and third.
It's really funny. I use that example. Sticking with Tom Hanks, I use the Green Mile.
Oh, yeah.
Rather, John's go-to was the Green Mile for that phenomenon of starting like
Out of the timeline.
Out of the timeline, and in both of those cases actually starting at the end. And because what's really funny about Saving Private Ryan is like you ask people about the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan and they're like, oh, blood on the sand and the storm. It's like the first scene in Saving Private Ryan is an old man taking his family to a war cemetery in France.
You're right.
And
it is.
It's like that's the opening shot, and you have to watch the entire movie to find out who that is, why they're there,
exactly, yeah,
whose grave he's visiting even. And that is something. It's funny I bring that up because it's one of those things where, like, if you're someone who's hired a ghostwriter and you're going to write your book and you've noticed that hundreds of times in movies, you just maybe haven't noticed that you've noticed it. But once you kind of, it's one of those things you kind of can't unsee. Yeah. And I think it's just very often the best way to start is either right in the middle or towards the end, and then work, and then go back to the chronological beginning. Yeah. Nobody wants to hear about the day you were born, or
right.
And unless that is the climax of your story, and you're going to come back to it or something.
Right. Yeah,
I think, yeah.
So when you're working with an author, and I know that you probably use this a lot, especially when you're first meeting with someone who's going to, write and publish their book, where does your intuition play a part in this process or in your personal journey? Do you listen to it? Do you not? What are results that you've actually seen that you can attribute to using your intuition?
Yeah, that is a great, I've been thinking about this question a lot, of the one, because you had mentioned a couple of things we were going to talk about, and I've never thought to call it that, but I try to, that to me is really what listening is about. I try to really figure out, if you've brought something up like 3 times, why do you keep bringing that up? Like, maybe we should go to that. How would I feel if I were you?
That's a good one.
Because I think it's really easy to, the kind of, and I've been told by therapists, this is like a bad question, is like, how does that make you feel or something? Because it's vague. It can kind of lead to more like dodging or whatever. And I think when I went to college, I thought I wanted to major in anthropology. I didn't have very good grades. And I was told, like, if you declared like an oddball major, it could like look better on your application. And one of the mistakes people make is they like put a lot of themselves in their questions, whether it's like, it's like this kind of like, you're already going to know what my opinion is before you've had a chance to tell me what yours is or whatever. And one of the things they told us was to sort of like, when people do like field research in anthropology, don't be like, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Like, if you were in a culture that's totally, totally foreign to you, and you were to say, let's say, I'm trying to think, like,
let's use Aborigines.
Yeah, I don't know if I know anything about their culture. I guess, like, let's say you were in Thailand and you saw monks meditating, and you're from a Western Judeo-Christian background, or maybe you're a missionary and you already have your mind made up about these things. And you're like, oh, are you praying? Someone might be inclined to just say, yeah. In some cultures, it's actually rude to answer a yes or no question with anything other than like, yes. That is not a correct answer to that question. And that is not a question that illuminates what they're doing or what purpose that serves in their culture. And you've actually just slammed a door shut by asking it in a way that doesn't allow for them to tell you anything. And that's an extreme example. Like, obviously we're not doing like anthropology here, but I mean, we kind of are. But I guess what I mean is, like, I try to never assume I know how somebody feels about something or what they want to talk about or what they want to emphasize. That's kind of for them to tell me. And I think, but I try to, like I ended up an English major, and in one of my English classes, we were told, like, when you go on a date and someone says, like, tell me about yourself or whatever, that's when the BS starts, because actually this person has been telling you about themselves since they walked in the door. Like,
right.
Someone's outfit tells you something about themselves, the way they handle money, the way they talk to the waiter, these are all there for you. And so like when people have weird fan theories about a book, it's usually because they haven't done real reading. They haven't actually paid attention to what's in the book. They need there to be something extra. And so I don't know. I just try to like read the person, I guess.
More from Charlie Daly on the next episode. If you found this interesting, I encourage you to join me for the next episode, and be sure to subscribe. Each week, one lucky listener who subscribes and posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will be entered into a drawing for the grand prize, a private VIP day with me valued at $25,000. So be sure to subscribe and post a review. Until then, keep on writing so you can finish the damn book. We'll see you next time.
So that's it for today's episode of Finish the Damn Book. Head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will win a chance in the grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 value private VIP day with Susie Schaefer herself. Head on over to finishthedamnbookpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Susie's gift. And join us on the next episode.